I'm John Wilkerson, and I want to review a couple of ideas of how to start and finish your novel. When I do the job of creating a new story, be it a 100,000-word novel or a 35,000-word novella, they both take the same type of background and structure work in order to create it, theorize it, outline, and eventually do the heavy editing. I always begin with the big idea. This is where I do the character building. I want to know who what their names are, what do they look like, what do they sound like in dialogue, and what do they sound like inside of their mind. If they're going to be the POV character, I really need to delve into what their dialect speech is, as well as if I'm going to have an antagonist, what is the dialect of the antagonist. I also theorize, what are their character traits? Do they stutter when they speak? Are they very vocal with their hands and they do a lot of gestures? Or do they speak mainly with correct English, very few contractions, and perfect vocabulary? The characters drive the story, and it's something that you need to theorize and put a lot of effort into doing. And that's equally true for the antagonist and the protagonist. You also have to do it for second and third level characters, the supporting characters, but you also need to theorize, are you going to have inanimate objects as characters? Is the ship they're going to be on a character? Is a starship a character? Hal is a great example in 2001: A Space Odyssey of a non-human character. So there is background work to be created for these characters. And you don't have to sit down and fill many pages of paper at one time to do this, but as you write your story, you can fill these pieces in. The second part of the big idea is the world building. This is really fun, and I enjoy this the most part. I theorize a lot of this as I drive around town or on the interstate, write down my notes and record the notes. And as I do my world building, I start thinking about the scenes. Are we going to start in a bar room? Are we going to move to a church sanctuary? Are we going to be at a school function? Is it going to be outside in the woods? But I have to think about how my world is created and where the characters go into it. And I don't just say that I'm going to create this big fantasy world and put these characters in it. I need to know where in the world they're going to be. Are they going to start out in one place and end up in another, or does it all take place inside of a train car and we never leave the train car? The third piece of my big idea is the plot. I need to start getting a handle of what my concept of the plot is. Is it going to be a murder mystery? Is it going to be someone looking for treasure? Is it an internal book of self-discovery? I don't have to really lay out all the key plot points at this point, but I need to start kind of pigeonholing this book into an area where I understand what I'm writing. The second piece I get to is building the book, and this deals with the outlining. When I do an outline, I typically start with one page of paper, one document file, whatever it might be, and I do that per chapter. And I outline, well, this is where the scene takes place. It takes place in a bar. This is who is in the scene. And then I need to understand what is the plot point taking place in this scene within this chapter. And I will do that sometimes for all the chapters, 30, 40 chapters for a book, or I might just do the first 3 or 4. But as I look at the outlining, I understand how I do this, because it's hard to just say, go outline your book. What I try to do is I lay out the beginning chapter, and I do a really good job of that, and I do it as a short story if all possible. And as I outline the first chapter, I try to do maybe 2 or 3 more and get an idea of how the plot develops in these first few chapters. And I get an introduction to the characters, I get an introduction to the world building and the scenes. And so I focus very heavily on the beginning. And then I tend to kind of skip over the middle section of the book and don't outline it too firmly because I know that I'm going to wander through the story. I then focus on the last chapter, or especially the last scene. If I can outline that scene and chapter and understand where the character, the protagonist, is going to end up, what the final conflict is, does someone live, does someone die, and what happens to the antagonist, it really helps me lock in where I'm going to go on the project. That this is a project management job of getting the outlining done, the character creation, world building, and all the pieces. And so if I can create the beginning of the book as an outline and understand how it begins, and then I can create the outline for the ending of the book, it's a lot easier for me to connect the pieces. The third part that I focus on, I call the words on the paper. This is when we're trying to just put out thousands of words and we're creating the first rough draft. The first draft does not need to be perfect. You do not need to worry about your spelling, your punctuation. All you're trying to do is to get all this creative thought that you have inside of your mind onto the paper or into the document on the computer. I will do this kind of free flow, just write and write and write. And if I need to jump around and add a sentence or add a paragraph, I do this wherever I need to place it. I don't worry about order. I don't worry about chronological ideas. All I want to do is I want to just load up my paper with thousands of words in some coherent form so that I do not lose my creative process. But once I do that, or as I'm doing that, I focus on the first chapter. And if I go back to the theory that I'm going to write the first chapter as a short story, and I want that to be an open-ending short story that leads the plot points forward, I now start to refine this. It lets me work with my character development, their voice of speaking, their dialect, what do they look like, who do they see in the scenes around them, and I really push on this. And if I'm following my outline, and I'm doing the first chapter, then I do the second chapter, I understand how the plot points move. Now, a theory that I have from the advertising world that I used to work in is that there's a reason newspapers have headlines. And I think that the first chapter, the first paragraph, if not just the first scene, needs to be written as a grabber. You need to open with something that is compelling for the reader to stay with the story. That you are learning about the character, and very early you want the reader to identify with this character and want to feel their pains and work with them to a solution, or maybe not to a solution if it's going to be an open-ended trilogy, and then you want to keep them moving. Now, editing is difficult in its own part. Let's assume that you have written your entire first draft. You have now polished it to the point where you think it's ready to be looked at by others. You can do this chapter by chapter, many chapters at a time, or an entire novel in one sitting where you're going to send it to someone else. Invariably, you're going to get a document marked up with red ink. It's going to come in as a Word document or Scriver or something, or it's going to be on paper and they've used pen and ink to do the corrections, and you're going to lose all hope that you're ever going to get this book done. Yeah, I've been there. I've written 100,000 word stories, got them back from the editors, and I swear it's going to take me another 9 months to clean it up. You know, that's how it goes. We all have to learn our craft. Writing is an art form, but getting it onto paper and told in a good form is an artistic approach, and you become an artisan. It takes practice and education to do this. You can use critique groups, you can use education, you can hire an editor to do the work for you. But no matter what happens, especially if this is your first book or two, you're going to have outside help in doing the editing. The fourth piece to look at is the amount of hard work involved in doing a story. It takes a level of commitment that most people don't have. And if you're going to sit down and do the book, you need to decide if you're really going to finish it. Writing the book is one piece, but making the commitment to finish the book is a whole nother personality trait. And if you have organization to help you do that, and you look at these three pieces of the big idea, building the book and the words on paper and their subsections, organization will help you. Have the documents already prepared for the character sheets, have the documents for the world building, understand how the outlining is working, and you don't have to stick to the outline, but you need to understand at least where you've been and have an idea of where you're going. And the last part is the education. It takes time to learn how to write with skill, especially if you want to write quickly with skill. You must continue to educate. As with any industry, with any endeavor you do, the more you do, the more you practice, the better your outcome. Now, what you've been watching is a short video that I've done that highlights an idea of how to start and finish your novel. If you go to my website, there's a full 3-part course to be looked at where I discuss the big idea, building the outline of the book in words on paper. Each of the video runs about 46 minutes each, and I get very in-depth into these 3 topics. So if you have any questions or you'd like some more information, reach out to me on my website, johnwilkerson.com. I do maintain an email address. Send me a note. We can discuss some ideas, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future.